Rutta, DLZ, and Sannam S4. I am the CEO and founder of Sannam S4, a market entry business based out in India, and we're proud to be collaborating with our partners on this webinar today. We have faced a few technical difficulties, as one does with these ambitious webinars when casting people from across, so please bear with us. We hope if the video doesn't continue, the audio will do. There is a panel that you will all be able to see to enable you to ask questions. Please do fire those questions at us throughout the webinar, and we will pick up on those individual questions throughout and towards the end of the webinar. So at this point, I'd like to introduce you to Diane Farrell, who's the acting president of US India Business Council, who is going to set the scene for India, its current economic environment, and the new India under its recently elected Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So without further ado, Diane, over to you.
Thank you very much, Adrian. It is an absolute pleasure to be joining you today. I will start out by saying good morning, good afternoon for those in Europe, and good evening for those who are in India joining us. I was joking with Adrian that we're really pushing the envelope here when it comes to technology, which is wonderful and very important and frankly emblematic of the U.S.-India relationship as it relates to the kinds of industries that are conceived and are taking place right now in both of our countries. I think we probably could have included someone from either the moon or Mars right now, or the space station, if we had had just a few more moments. And these kinds of technologies will continue to improve as we use them and become more familiar. So I commend Sannam S4 for taking on this ambitious prospect of having face-to-face conversations. I also do want to say to Sannam S4 how pleased we are to have you part of the US IBC membership. And I say that because you provide an extraordinarily important opportunity to companies who may be in India but may not understand the opportunities that they have to expand, who are thinking about India either because they have a personal connection but don't exactly know how to get it started, and who may need that extra support, at least initially, in order to get going. And in my work both with Ken as well as with Adrian, and having had the privilege of touring the facilities in Delhi specifically, I can't say enough about what a neat operation they've got there, and how helpful they can be to companies large and small, whether it's back-end operations, as I say, whether it's companies that need office space in order to get started. And Adrian's background particularly is so incredibly strong with all companies and with India that he's an extraordinarily helpful consultant to his clients. But I also have to say, my colleagues in Delhi and in my interactions as well with Adrian, his perspective and his understanding about the economic relationship comes with great depth and knowledge. And so I look forward, Adrian, to your comments a little bit later in this program. To the companies who are joining us, thrilled that I'm with my Ohio-based colleagues, especially Vanita. I haven't seen you in a little while, so I'm thrilled to have you participating. We always enjoy working with Kegler Brown. I've been honored to be part of Kegler Brown presentations to potential business prospects who are thinking about India. Kegler Brown does a great job of this, and they have a wonderful and very important and impressive client base. And to DLZ Corporation, my friends, they are also so pleased you're joining, because you really do have this firsthand experience, and DLZ is on the cutting edge of any number of technologies. Absolutely fascinating work. And so again, to get your perspective on today's program is also going to be, I think, very enriching to participants. I'm just going to give a broad overview because we are really in a high-octane moment when it comes to the US-India relationship. Obviously, I don't have to remind everyone that Prime Minister Modi visited the United States at the end of September. We were very pleased, the Council was very pleased to host him for his one and only business address to the investment community. He had done a lot of one-on-ones prior to that, meeting with major global multinationals, but this was his opportunity to speak to the broader community. We had about 450 people in attendance, and though it was the last event of the Prime Minister's before he left to head back to India, and this was following several days of fasting, you could feel the energy as he was addressing the crowd, and as he was speaking, and he was, responding to the kind of facial expressions and audience response to his remarks, that it just got to be a stronger and stronger message, and he left clearly feeling that the potential was enormous. In fact, at that event, we informally announced that on the basis of a survey of companies, not all of our companies, but a significant enough to project, we estimated that there was at a minimum $41 billion waiting in investment in Gujarat in just the next 2, 3, maybe 4 years, simply on the basis of the kinds of reform commitments that the Prime Minister made, including expressions like more red carpet, less red tape, recognizing that the investment community, the business community, isn't going to come into India unless there is a compelling reason from a profitability standpoint. He sounded all the right notes, and as I say, the audience responded accordingly. We have seen some good actions taking place now. We're watching Parliament as it's in session. We're closely monitoring activities regarding the insurance bill, which would raise FDI to 49%. We see that not just as it relating to an industry, we see it as an opportunity for long-term investment for infrastructure projects becoming enabled because you've got longer-term money now in the market. And also, given the fact that it's a bill that has been around, a concept that's been around for a long time, both the Congress Party as well as the BJP Party have at varying times been supportive or have been in opposition, we are very hopeful and excited that the insurance bill may finally pass in this session of Parliament. That will be greeted as another very firm indicator that the government of India is absolutely committed to forward growth. So those are a few examples, and then of course we learned only 2 weeks ago that President Obama will now be the chief guest at the Republic Day exercises on January 26th. And what a wonderful way to continue the synergy that the two gentlemen clearly developed during the Prime Minister's visit to Washington, D.C. And this is a true honor for the President and for the United States, since this is the first time that a U.S. President has been invited as chief guest at the Republic Day exercises. USIBC is looking to host an opportunity while the President is in either Delhi or another city in India to continue the dialogue. In between, we've had the Trade Policy Forum that met just before Thanksgiving, the Strategic Dialogue that took place in late July, and following the President's visit, we're aware that there will be a very high-level cabinet official visiting India. We expect, it's an open secret, so there's nothing official, but we expect that Secretary Kerry will be leading the U.S. delegation to Vibrant Gujarat that's going to be taking place in Ahmedabad and Gandhinagar in Gujarat, which will take on a pan-India tone to it this time. While it's certainly going to be about Gujarat, the Prime Minister who created this, conceived of this event, this conclave every other year, is going to be very much there. He's bringing his highest cabinet officials with him. And so I'm delighted that USIBC is going to be leading a delegation. Adrian just told me that he's planning to join us. We're thrilled about that because, again, anyone that meets Adrian and has an opportunity to benefit from his wisdom and experience is going to be enriched. So there's just a lot going on. I mean, I can't think of a time where we've had more happening on the ground here in the States, on the ground in India, than perhaps the civil nuclear agreement, which was back in 2008. And this is frankly a much more comprehensive, all-encompassing moment. And the final thought that I will leave you with, that I shared with Adrian and Ken, if he can, if he's able to hear, is that the SME focus is very strong on the part of both governments. I'm aware of this from conversations with the embassy in Delhi, where beyond just the president's visit or these other sort of high-level engagements, they are extremely committed to facilitating on behalf of small and medium enterprises. The U.S. Commerce Department, through the Foreign Commercial Services, also has a heavy SME focus. The same would be said for the Export-Import Bank of the United States, the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, and the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, or OPIC. They are all wanting to make sure that advocacy organizations like the U.S. India Business Council are providing access and pathways, not just to the global multinationals, but to those companies on the ground here in the U.S., on the ground in India, who have, in many cases, strong family ties, not in all, but in many, but who are job creators that are not always recognized when you get into the macro statistics and you get into the more sort of dramatic kinds of discussions, and yet they really are the basis, the foundation of the priorities for both countries, which is to make sure that they are creating jobs, meaningful jobs for their citizens, that they can then go on and have the kind of lives and give their families the kind of lives that everybody aspires to. So with that, I can't say it enough. This is a moment. There is no question about it. And to the extent that you all are able to participate in the activities that Sannam S4 offers and that US IBC offers, I think the probabilities are truly limitless for how far we can go and how this relationship can absolutely flourish over the next 2, 3, 5, and certainly over the next 10 years. So with that, I think, Adrian, I will go back to you unless Ken is now online.
No, I think we're still struggling with audio from Ken, Diane, so I'll happily pick up. You raised some very, very strong anecdotes for why the US relationship with India is very much back on track, and I know we're both excited to be part of that agenda. What's particularly interesting for me now is the focus in the US on engaging the SME sector of US corporate activity. One thing that I've seen over the last 22 years of being involved in India and helping organizations of all shapes and sizes is that the US has typically been very, very strong at Fortune 500 level in India. The big multinationals have been there for a long time. They've invested in the country, and they're there to stay. When I look at companies that are active in the market and doing successful business there, they tend to be much more at a smaller level. And on the SME scale, smaller is the operative word. And I think what's happening now is the US is waking up to the opportunity from a consumer side. Historically, the US has been very strong at capitalizing on India's cost efficiencies, whether it be in labor, whether it be in production, whether it be in outsourcing. And that's largely as a result of strong Indian diaspora in Silicon Valley and across corporate United States. Now, as you start to see the relationship develop, as you start to see India open up its borders through a number of policy initiatives to bring down the red tape, I certainly expect and hope that many more mid-sized and smaller American companies will follow the footsteps that the European companies have made in the last decade or so and participate. Because when there are 1.3 billion people in a market that is expanding and is opening its borders up to trade, as you quite rightly say, Diane, the opportunity is absolutely critical, and it's absolutely now is the time. So I think you set the scene very well. One of the things that I wanted to talk about a little bit today is how do the approaches of SMEs differ to multinationals going into the Indian market. Typically, multinationals, as we all know, have larger resource pools. They typically have expertise in the areas of internationalization. They've typically been in an emerging market before. They've got some financial bandwidth to take a bit more of a risk on a project in a market like India. And they've also got a brand name to carry them forward, which stands them in very good stead in India as it does anywhere else in the world. When you look at mid-market and smaller companies, a lot of those criteria are not evident. They don't necessarily have the financial bandwidth to make mistakes. They don't necessarily have household brand names, and they certainly don't have the internal resources and clout that maybe a multinational does when it's making its own footprint in India. So a market entry approach from an SME has to be tailored differently. The challenges remain the same. The challenges of navigating India's financial, accounting, and regulatory environment, the challenges of hiring the right people, the challenges of setting up an office, they all remain similar for SMEs as they do for the multinationals. But it's very, very important that SMEs, and we deal with an awful lot of them, take certain care and precaution when they are approaching the market. So apologies if you're having some background noise. That's just our colleagues at Kegler Brown joining us in the background, and I'll come on to them shortly. So when approaching the Indian market for an SME, there are certain things that are absolutely critical. It's important that you go into the market with thorough research, and that research is not just the high-level statistical research that is readily available on the internet. It's really looking up under the covers of the market, understanding where your product or service fits, which type of route to market is going to be most effective for you longer term. We've seen many organizations go into India, take the first route available to them because they've met someone at a trade show, for example, that they felt comfortable with, exploring all options, and focus on an output-driven research program. So looking at an opportunity to really understand where your product will sit, what is the actual price that that product is realistically going to sell at, what are the costs that are built around getting your product or service to market, and then how should that product be distributed. We've seen a number of companies go into relationships with joint venture partners through distribution channels. They've set up their own infrastructure in India, and there are pluses and minuses to each of those in any part of the world. But it's very important that you really understand who you're working with such that their interests are aligned with yours. And one thing that we always recommend to people who are serious about the market is investing in someone, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a team of people, but someone or a small number of people who in the early days are absolutely focused on your success. And when they get out of bed in the morning, he or she is putting on your company shirt, going out in the market for you, and carrying your future activities in India. And that is really, really important. Having someone there that is looking out for your interests, key number one piece of advice that we would give. Important though, when you're looking to hire people, having identified a distribution channel or partnership arrangement, is that you are building a cost base that is relevant for India. Many companies internationally are going to a recruitment situation in India where they look to hire people and they say, wow, that's really cheap. You know, that person cost me $60,000, $100,000 in the US, and they're only costing me $30,000 equivalent. Bear in mind, as you build your business up in India, you are going to be competing against other Indian companies, very likely, as well as other international companies who have got a local cost base, who have built up infrastructure over a period of time, who have maybe paid off that investment already, and who are likely hiring people at appropriate salaries. And what we find very often is that companies come in, they hire people on salaries that still look attractive to them in dollar terms, But when they actually build their business up over a 2, 3, 4 year period, they find that their cost base is out of kilter and they're unable to actually make the profits that they'd forecast. The revenues may be flowing in, but they've got space. And that's really, really critical. So when you are hiring people as part of an entry strategy, make sure you do it on terms that are localized. One of the other things that we see SMEs make the mistake of in India, which multinationals may not do, is that MNCs are very focused on compliance, and they have armies of internal personnel managing their legal activities, IP protection, looking at their accounting and tax issues to the market. Most SMEs don't necessarily have that army of resource, and they certainly don't always have the international experience that an MNC have. But you should never forget that compliance is something that is important in every market that you're going into. And Kegler Brown will no doubt talk a little bit more about that when I pass over to them. But it is really important that the compliance from a tax perspective, how you invest your money in the country, how you bring your products into the country, how you're hiring someone, what type of contracts you're providing them, because the labor law rules in India are fairly stringent and becoming increasingly so for corporate governance purposes. And then how you manage the affairs of your business on a day-to-day basis. Many companies, in my experience, have gone into India with great excitement, all the right ambitions, and have found themselves hamstrung maybe 6, 12, 18 months down the line by being caught up with a matter of compliance that they hadn't dealt with up front. So it's really important that you don't ignore the fact that all of those compliances are required because you're dealing in a foreign market. That said, when you seek to with advisors in India, whether it's your home advisors that you already work with in your own state in the US, or whether you've identified partners in India that you're going to work with, make sure they understand your business and your goals and your objectives, because typically in India, many of the disciplines that you will need to build a successful business have an overlap, as they do in many other parts of the world. HR matters roll into accounting and tax matters, which roll into legal matters, which roll into operational matters. And so it's really important that the service providers that you work with, A, understand your business and what you're trying to achieve, and B, have an open communication line with you on all areas of your business, such that you are able to knit together a coherent, focused and fairly cost-effective approach to the market, recognizing that not everyone is looking to invest vast sums of money. So it's important to dip your toe into the market first. We don't advise our clients to overcomplicate their life in India from day one. You do not necessarily have to open a legal entity and go through all the complexities and compliances from day one. You can look at incubation models, you can look at distribution channels, you can look at partnership arrangements to start with, but always look longer term. One thing that I always say to my clients at the first meeting is, do you expect to be successful in India? And the answer is always yes. Otherwise, why would they be having this conversation with me, and why would they be coming into India in the first place? If that is the case, roll your business forward 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and look at what your model would look like if you fast forward it based on the model you started with. And that's very, very important, because some people who are excited about going into India in the early stages choose a route to market or a partner or a distribution channel that in the longer term may not serve their best interest. So it's just worth time going through that in the early stages. So those are the types of high-level advisory pointers that I give clients, and they are really based on anecdotal examples. Many of the customers that have come to us have already been through some of these issues and challenges before, but many of them also, who plan their journey correctly, are doing successful business in India and are making very good progress. So hopefully those tips will stand you in good stead, and will give you a clear idea on how an SME's approach will differ from an MNC's. At this point, I'm going to reach out to our colleagues at Kegler Brown. We have had some audio and video problems with their link, so if I can connect with them. Kegler Brown, are you there?
We are here. Can you hear us?
We can hear you loud and clear. Thank you very much. This is Martijn from Kegler Brown, Hill and Rutter. Martijn, you have got great expertise in India, taking a whole range of clients from a range of sectors into the market on a range of different formats, JV partners, distributors, setting up local entities. And I'd like to hand over to you to introduce yourself and your colleagues there, who I also know have got great and broad experience. And if you could share with the audience some of the experiences that you've had, and provide some of the pieces of advice that would help some of our listeners guide their way through their journey as they embark in India.
Thank you, Adrian. As you mentioned, I'm Martijn Steger. I lead the global business practice here at Kegler Brown, and we will focus initially in our comments on SMEs. Obviously, as this webinar was designed, we are happy in the Q&A session for the companies that are not SMEs, but on this webinar to address issues that may be more apropos for their business already existing in India. I'll start, before I get into a couple of specific points. I'd like to introduce my colleague Vinita Bari Mehra, who practiced before joining us about 11 years ago, practiced with a major law firm in India, and is a partner with our firm, as well as leading our Asia Pacific practice and our global education practice. And also our colleague Bruce Bachmeyer, who is, as you mentioned, Adrian, early on, is with DLZ. And DLZ is based here in the US, but has extensive operations in India. Bruce spends a huge amount of time in India, and even though they're an SME, they are highly vested in India, and he'll be tailoring his comments to their experience. Now, we were asked, Adrian, to talk first about how to better ensure being paid for one's products or services in India. I will focus on the most common entry mode early on for going into India, which to take advantage of the market, which would be exporting to India, and we then can address during the Q&A session some other modes of entry, whether it be a joint venture or a greenfield operation. But in the exporting to India situation, obviously, as with a new relationship with an importer in any country, the more you can get in advance payment in a new relationship, the better. Obviously, that's often not going to be possible for the full amount of the price for your goods or services. So to the extent that there will be an amount outstanding, perhaps a little bit counterintuitively with India, our experience has been that a bank guarantee is a better, more effective payment security mechanism than a letter of credit. If you do go to the letter of credit option, you want an irrevocable letter of credit if you can get it. Again, we can talk about details during the Q&A session if there's time. One of the things that we find that many companies don't think of is that they reflexively choose their own law and own country's dispute resolution mechanism. For example, choose the law of a U.S. state and arbitration or litigation in the U.S. court. Well, where you need to collect in India, if the importer, your customer, doesn't pay, you really need to have selected Indian law and dispute resolution in the courts of India. Among other things, it'll give you the right to freeze assets. And in most cases, if you're an SME dealing with an SME in India, they're not going to have assets in the U.S. That you could go after. So it's important to not rely on past practice of choosing one's own law or one's own dispute resolution forum. The other kind of practical tip on this legal side is it's very important to consider the appropriate Incoterm. And do not assume that your customer in India will necessarily be thinking about the accurate Incoterms. A lot of companies just use a particular Incoterm reflexively without thinking about it. So it's important to have a discussion about who bears the risk of loss, who bears particular costs, who's responsible for making sure that insurance on the goods, if you're shipping goods. And in fact, it often can be better simply to spell those things out in the terms of sale rather than simply using an Incoterm, just to make sure that there's no lack of clarity about that. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Vanita, the second topic we were asked to talk about, which is getting profits out of India. Vanita?
Yes. In doing business in India, I think one of the most important thing a company should consider is how will they take their money out of India with respect to repatriation. The good news is that repatriation is freely allowed in India as compared to a lot of other countries who have restrictions. However, India does have very stringent exchange control regulations which actually sets forth, how much money can be repatriated, what kind of money can be repatriated, and most importantly, there are certain withholding taxes that will apply to the income that is earned in India by the US company. So thorough due diligence should be done very early on when you get into transactions, and that could be in form of if you're exporting products or you're providing services to a company in India, or you land up doing joint venture or setting up your own entity and then earning income, and then there are going to be intercompany agreements involved. In any of those scenarios, if there are any payments coming from an Indian entity or the payer is an Indian company, there would be most likely withholding taxes. And the withholding taxes differ and depend upon the categorization of the income. So if the income is categorized as royalty under the India-US tax treaty, the withholding tax would be 15%, otherwise 25%. So similarly, different category and categorization of income will have different aspects of withholding taxes that would apply. And in some cases, if the income is considered as what we call business income, and we won't get into details about definition of business income, which is generally considered in the absence of a permanent establishment in India, there could be no withholding taxes. But a bottom line on getting profits out of India is the first step is to do concrete due diligence on tax implications of the company planning to do business in India. The second most important aspect of getting profits out of India is to receive payments from any Indian company or from an Indian payer. The government requires the foreign company, the US company, to provide two documents. One is the US company would have to obtain a permanent account number, which is called PAN, and submit that to the Indian payer or give notice of that to the Indian payer. And if the US company is availing a lower tax treaty, so for example, if royalty is the characterization of the income, and the US company wants to avail the 15% withholding as compared to 25%, then they need to provide what they call a tax residency certificate, a TRC, to the Indian company. Until unless the Indian company does not receive these two documents, the payments will not be made to the US company. So it's very important that in your contract negotiations, in your discussions with the Indian companies there, very early on, you know what will be the set of documents and information you would need to provide to your Indian partner in return for receiving payments in a timely fashion. So those are the key things on getting our profits out of India. Another aspect which Ken and Adrian wanted us to cover was, negotiating contracts with Indian companies. We have seen in our experience advising our clients that there are definitely cultural differences in negotiation, in the way the Indian businesses negotiate and the way the US business negotiate. And the most important thing from a practical perspective to keep in mind is patience. Contract negotiations can be expected to go more slowly in India, and especially if you're dealing with the Indian government, it does take a whole lot of time to get into concrete execution. The second most important practical tip in contract negotiation, keeping the cultural aspect in mind, is hello.
You're still on, Vinita.
Can you hear us?
You're still good. Yeah,
yes,
you're still good.
Hear you.
Okay, sorry. Okay.
Great.
All right. There's very different approach to communication. Generally, our experience has been that Indian parties may not disagree with you directly about contractual issues, and the reason for that is it's just they believe a lot in respect, and they do not want to be confrontation in their action. But also, they have a very different work style with respect to negotiation. They'll jump back and forth and have multiple goals for that negotiation. So what we advise to our clients, and what we do most of the times, is if we're having a contract negotiation, in every negotiation call we have, very early on, we list down the list of issues that need to be discussed. We have that call, we discuss those lists of issues, both parties are on the same page, and then after the call is over, we make sure we do a follow-up email, making sure that those issues were discussed and that those issues don't come back again after 2 weeks, because you may experience that you believe that you've negotiated a particular provision of a contract, but after 2 weeks, the Indian party may come back and renegotiate those clauses. So that could sometimes be very confusing to a U.S. executive, because we tend to follow a very monochronic way of negotiation, is like take points after points rather than do multiple points at the same time and jump back and forth with respect to key issues. And then lastly, on the from a practical perspective, it will be helpful to have some flexibility in your contract terms, especially in terms of your pricing. It could be possible that you will execute a contract, and then after 6 months, you may be requested by your Indian party to revisit the commercial terms of the contract. So if you build in some flexibility, the revisit of the contract does not come as a shocker to the U.S. company. I think Martin wanted to discuss about the cultural tips.
Yeah, there's one other, thanks, Anita. There's one other practical point that is in part cultural and in part maybe transcends culture, and that is something as simple as the venue of the location for the negotiation. There's a dynamic there that is worth thinking about before you set out where you're going to negotiate. So to give one example, we recently helped a U.S. A very large U.S. company, but I think this applies to SMEs as well, with its negotiation of an acquisition of a going concern in India. And it was in a very critical sector in the Indian economy. And of course, it made sense for the top officials of the U.S. company to go to India for these negotiations, given that we're purchasing a going concern there. But part of the dynamic that then happened, the good side was it showed a commitment to the market, a strong interest in the acquisition, but the signal that was received by the Indian company was that we were so vested, the client was so vested in doing the deal that we had the impression that the Indian company thought that it could play hardball on some of the terms. Mm-hmm. And so it's important to be aware that even something as seemingly simple as the location of the negotiation can affect the dynamics of the negotiation. And so what we had to do is Vinita was there with the CFO of the client in the negotiation, and we really had to have the CFO step out when situations arose, like the Indian company wanted to renegotiate a critical term that we thought was already settled. So the CFO would step out, showing impatience with having to go back over that issue, showing that he was willing to leave and let the negotiation stop. So do think about the dynamics in a negotiation situation as well. And then we're going to wrap up with, I think, really the last topic we were asked to address, which is the topic of hiring staff versus using independent contractors. Vanita, do you want to touch on that briefly?
Yeah. So when you're going to India, you will do the due diligence and the analysis that how are you going to enter that market. Just piggybacking on what Adrian had said. Are you planning to have an independent contractor or you're planning to have an employee in India? If you have an independent contractor, some of the important characteristics of that relationship would need to be kept in mind. So, for example, you would want to make sure that he or she is truly an independent contractor. You have limited control and supervision over that contractor. The second thing you will want to keep in mind is that you're not bound by any actions of that independent contractor, because it could be possible that if the independent contractor has authority to act as an agent of the U.S. company or bind the U.S. company into contractual relationships, it could lead to certain tax implications for the U.S. company. It is the concept of what I had referred to earlier called permanent establishment. The India-U.S. tax treaty and even the Indian tax laws provide that if an independent contractor creates a permanent establishment for the U.S. company, then the U.S. company or the income the U.S. company earns in India, which is attributable to those actions, will be taxed in India. So you have to be very careful to make sure that the independent contractor does not have authority to bind the U.S. company into contractual relationship. It helps to have non-exclusivity, so the independent contractor should have the freedom to engage with other parties. So mutual non-exclusivity in the dealings will help to maintain the independent contractor relationship. And then obviously have clauses to the agreement saying that there's no liability of either parties for third-party actions. So by putting certain checks and balances in your contract for independent contractor, you could truly maintain that independent contractor relationship and also try to avoid any unforeseen tax implications due to a presence of an independent contractor. Sometimes, similarly to what we see in the U.S., the misclassification risk. In India, in practice, while it's possible to have consultancy agreements that can look pretty similar to or be like employment agreements, like exclusivity requirements, reporting, fixed pay, but as long as a minimum degree of independence can be maintained, that helps to elevate some of that risk. So you need to be careful if you're entering to an independent contractor, but you're going to treat them as employees. You need to undertake those analyses of risk and benefits of doing that. Then moving on, if you go down the route of having an employee in India and not an independent contractor, the bad news in that is under India's exchange control regulations, of non-resident, which would be a U.S. company or any foreign company, can only employ personnel in India if it has a place of business in India through a company branch or liaison office. But however, it will be possible for the U.S. company to hire consultants or hire companies who can act as your conduit for hiring employees. But otherwise, direct hiring of employees without a place of business in India is not permitted currently under the exchange control regulation. And if you do land up having a presence in India or a place of business in India, I will second what Adrian had said early on. The labor law consequences must be looked into. India has very stringent labor law protection for its employees. And India's labor law is at federal level or at central level, we mention, and then there's also labor law compliance at the state level. So depending upon which state the U.S. company will have its place of business, they would need to also comply with labor laws of that state, in addition to federal compliance of labor laws. And then lastly, from a tax consequences perspective, if you're going to have an employee there, and there's going to be intercompany transactions between the U.S. company and the Indian company, you may want to again revisit the issue of permanent establishment, because under the tax rules, sometimes the employee is per se considered as a representative of the non-resident company. It can lead to, again, tax implication. such as then the non-Indian company being exposed to taxes. So those are some things to keep in mind in analyzing whether you want to take the approach of hiring an independent contractor versus hiring an employee. And you, as I mentioned, you can't hire an employee directly. You would need to have some place of business or some arrangements in place to have those employees on the payroll.
Great, Benita. I'm going to defer any the final legal comments I was going to make until the Q&A session, because I want to make sure we have time for Bruce to talk about DLZ's experience in India from an SME perspective. Bruce?
Thanks, Martin. I'm Bruce Bachmeyer, Director of Renewable Energy for DLZ Corporation. We've been doing business in India since 1998, so we've got sort of a track record. We are in hydropower and also developing hydrokinetic technology. I guess I would express my same enthusiasm as Diane did earlier, that we think it's an exciting time. We think it's a good time to invest in India and to do business in India. Saying that, I think from a U.S. perspective, going into India, there's three words I think that you should keep in mind, and that is patience, diligence, and persistence. I think those were, it's going to take a lot longer to get things done in India as compared to the U.S. So just keeping that in mind. I think probably if you're going into India, I can't stress this enough, that you need competent advisors, both legal and tax up front, both on the U.S. side and on the Indian side. You need to, from the very beginning, you need to come up with a strategy, how to set up your business, the investment side of it, and also it would help you be able to pull money back out later on. So I can't stress that enough. The other thing is, I would look at it from a long-term basis. I don't think the resources required of a company to go into India or any other company, or especially India, from a short-term basis, I just don't think it's worth it. I think you have to look at it from a long-term basis. Also, I think in dealing with the people in India, it's more of a relationship-based atmosphere and customs, and not so much that transaction-based as we're used to in the U.S. So I think it's important to identify those people in your industry and your customers, and I think develop that relationship, and that will pay big dividends with you. The other thing is, I guess, as I think Anita said, that a lot of times the people avoid confrontation, and as a result of that, sometimes things going through the process of government, it's being delayed, and a lot of times the people are looking for payoffs in order to expedite that, but you won't know that. And I think that's a good point as far as getting local people on the ground there who can identify those issues at that point, because you're not going to be able to know that.
Good. Okay. I mean, you raised some very, very practical points, Bruce. Obviously, learned through experience, and they played very well with the type of advice that Martin and Benita were giving. We've got a question from one of the audience, which said that if you were to do something differently going into India and developing your business there, what would that be?
Do something differently?
Yeah. Is there a mistake that you made that you felt that you would go about it differently? The way you entered the market, the product placement, the pricing, how you set things up. Are there any experiences that you could share with the audience with hindsight?
I think probably at the beginning we probably didn't have the right advisors that had the competence from an international standpoint at the beginning. I think very good, competent advisors both overseas and in the U.S. But I think at the beginning we didn't have the right advisors that had the expertise, both from a legal and accounting and tax side.
Okay, great. Well, no, thank you. I mean, some really useful and practical tips. And go ahead.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll wrap it up. I think, the road going into India, I think, can be bumpy, but with patience and persistence, I think you can accomplish that, and I think it can pay huge dividends to a company. You have to look at it from a standpoint as 1.1 billion people, the population. The economy is going great. I just got back from Mumbai. I looked in the downtown. I counted, I think it was about 15 cranes with high rises being built. Try and find that in the U.S. in any city. So I think the economy is starting to boom. I think it's a good time to invest and to do business in. And again, I'll close my comments with patience, diligence, and persistence.
Great. Thanks, Bruce. Adrian,
Thanks.
back over to you.
Thank you very much, Martijn. Thank you, Bruce. That was really interesting. And I think some of these anecdotes and tips that were given to the audience will collate and circulate to all those who have registered and attended the webinar, because I can hear some pencils rapidly scribbling in the background. But Diane, I wanted to just pass the question back to you at this point. Bruce's business, DLZ, is by the sounds of it, very high tech, very niche. Got a very definitive product line. In your engagements with the wider American business community, where would you say the opportunities are? Are there particular sectors that are developing, or do you see that there are opportunities across the board for mid-market America?
Well, and thank you to all of the speakers, to Martijn, to Vinita, to Bruce, and I do have to say DLZ has very, very interesting technologies in the water, in the hydro area. I wish that we had a video, because just to see the concept that they've come up in terms of deriving energy from the flow of rivers, it's cutting edge. It's quite remarkable. My overall thought is that clearly the Prime Minister's desire to break up the roadblocks when it comes to infrastructure is enormous as an opportunity. The second, and the one that we're focusing on very intently at the moment, is the Smart Cities Initiative that the Prime Minister announced. Actually, the Finance Minister announced as part of the initial budget address back in July, with 100 smart cities. And the President and the Prime Minister, of course, signed off on an agreement for 3 cities in India: Vizag in Andhra Pradesh, but also Ajmer and Allahabad in UP and in Rajasthan. The U.S. government is particularly focused on how it can be helpful to companies as those particular cities come up. There's no limit, though, to what U.S. companies can avail themselves of with the other smart cities. It just happens that these 3 are politically connected between the President and the Prime Minister. Within the smart city concept, I mean, everything that a U.S. company has to offer, and I think of DLZ in particular, where this is a convergence of rivers in some cases, that I wouldn't hesitate to be in touch with federal government, those resources, as well as folks like you guys and ourselves. But I think that's where I'd be going right now. And then I'd also be obviously migrating to states that have a more business-friendly attitude, because obviously there's a diversity of view about welcoming foreign direct investment. So that's another place to go. And and then of course things like the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor, the development of the Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. It's really somewhat limitless. I almost think that you have to decide where you want to be on the basis of a lot of the criteria that were just laid out by Martijn and by Vinita. And then you stake your claim and you start to determine how that product fits into that market, etc. It's pretty basic, but I'd start with something organized. I just think it's easier, because it's impossible to talk about a consumer market the size that we're predicting India's consumer market to become someday. It's just too big. So you really have to take it in bite-sized pieces, and I think especially that's true with the SMEs. And Bruce, I got a real kick out of your comment regarding knowing, who your partner is, because I was on the board of directors of the Export-Import Bank of the United States for 4 years, and I had the SME portfolio as part of that responsibility, which was challenging at times because mostly we were doing aircraft financing or big, GE gas turbines, etc. And so it was hard to sometimes get the focus onto small businesses, although we did. But I got a kick out of the fact that the chairman of the bank, Fred Hochberg, once when we were in India, turned to me and he said, only in America do you make the deal first and then get to know the guys on the other side of the table. And I think that does speak volumes to the fundamental challenges that our companies have that can easily be overcome with the right kind of advice and counsel on the ground in India. So I will leave my thoughts there, Adrian. I know we're slightly over on our time, but I'm guilty of a page and a half of notes as I've been sitting here because these are excellent suggestions that I will keep close by as we continue the work in India.
Great stuff. Thank you, Diane. And I am aware that we're over time, and that was because of the late start, and apologies for that. It does appear, though, that we've still got everyone hanging on, which is great to see. So I'm just going to run it for a few more minutes, Diane, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
We've got a question that's come in from the audience, Vinita, which I'm going to fire at you. It's one of the tricky subjects and often gets left off these webinars, but I like to bring it to the fore just to show that we are tackling the issues. Vinita, one of the audience has asked, from a legal standpoint in the US, when you're engaging in India and you do feel that you are operating in an environment that may potentially have the payoffs that Bruce was referring to, concisely, what can you do to protect yourself from any collateral damage in those instances?
Sure. As we know, in the U.S., we do have a Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which is FCPA, and FCPA does have extraterritorial jurisdiction, which means it would apply to any U.S. company's subsidiaries or any U.S. company's activities in any other foreign country if there is an act of bribe involved. So in these we have plenty of clients who come across these kind of situations, and there are multiple ways to handle depending on what situation you are in. Definitely the position is that in dealing with the government or with government office, if there's a request, the client actually says no. And we have seen that the client has asked for it a couple of times. It's not with one no, they go away. But when you multiply say that this is not a company policy, we represent a U.S. company, we are a subsidiary of a U.S. company, this is not going to happen, it will delay your project for sure in India. But eventually the message goes through. In some instances, you may not have a direct contact or a direct request for such payoffs. You may have agents who are dealing for you, who are independent agents, who may be doing things which you may not have a notice of in India. In that cases, we advise that to make sure that you do two things. Is anytime you take over a company or you acquire a company or you set up a company, you do a compliance program where you train your employees as well as your independent agents on FCPA compliance, because sometimes these independent agents are just ignorant of the fact that there is a law called FCPA and how it applies to a US company in India, and that training purpose helps them to be educated in that issue. And the second way you can protect is in your agreements with your independent agents or contractors or whoever is doing that dealing with you, make sure you do have clause in the agreement which says that they will not undertake any bribery act. So it's like a safe harbor provision for you in the agreement, since you're not controlling the acts of the agent. So it's a very difficult situation when it comes to corruption in India. But however, I can tell you, since we've had the new government, when Narendra Modi joined the parliament, the first ordinance that he passed was on corruption. And there is a bill now pending before the Indian parliament to kind of stringent the existing corruption act, which is the Prevention of Corruption Act. So I see that as a positive step by the Indian government. However, yes, corruption is still very prevalent in India, but I see that changes happening to that. And when I talk to my friends and colleagues who do enough work in business in India, especially the younger generation, they actually now refuse to pay any out-of-pocket bribes. However, having said that, we've heard of enough scams in India where even the top ministers have been involved in payoffs, and there's nothing that can be done about that. But if you keep in mind certain due diligence steps and certain compliances, you should train your employees and your independent agents. That at least mitigates the risk that, at least from an FCA perspective, you did what you had to do to avoid any payoffs or any bribery acts in India.
Yeah, very good answer.
I would add,
go ahead, Martin.
Adrian, I would add one quick note, which is that in addition to the very concrete steps that Vanita suggested, it's also important to look at the financial terms of the relationship with the agents, because often payments that are in violation of either the FCPA or the Prevention of Corruption Act in India go through agents. And so the training is critical, but also making sure that the financial terms are such that the agent isn't receiving out-of-market kind of terms that then the agent has some additional money to use for bribes, even if the U.S. company is not directly aware of those. So looking at the financial terms is also quite important.
Very good, thank you. I mean, I think there's some excellent and very practical suggestions there. And I'm sure Diane would agree that the business environment as a whole is changing. You have a Prime Minister in Narendra Modi that actually understands what it takes to build a business-friendly environment, because he's done that very successfully in his previous home state of Gujarat. And for the first time in a long time, I think India's got a Prime Minister that is genuinely focused on addressing the key challenges that international investors and partners have, and of course this falls into that. I'm going to ask Bruce the last question, because I now see one or two people obviously moving on to other meetings. But Bruce, the question has come in that says, since your business has gone into India, have you managed to successfully penetrate across the length and breadth of India, or are you still finding that you're fairly regionalized in your activity?
No, our projects are throughout India, primarily in the western part, but up far north, the central, and down towards the southern part. So, but like Diane said, individuals, when you do business, you have to look at each state, because each state is totally different, and they have differences and philosophies on accepting foreign investment. And so you have to choose that state wisely as far as which state you're going to go in and invest money in that state, which state.
Okay, all right.
And Adrian, I'll add on to that point. Just even if a U.S. company is looking at exporting products, India is a very regionalized country in terms of business. So sometimes companies could make a mistake having just one agent for the entire Indian market, and that sometimes may not work. You may need to have multiple agents, some agent taking care of the northern portion of India, the other agent taking care of the southern portion, because even the agency relationships are very localized and regionalized. So a couple of ways to penetrate the market on a region-to-region basis is to maybe have multiple distributors or have multiple agents, or have a company which does have who you may choose as an agent or distributor has offices and warehouses in different states. Because I will second what Diane and Bruce said, India is still a very regionalized economy. Even in terms of language, the language they speak in different parts of India differ. So if you're doing a transaction with a company down south, you want to make sure you have somebody on your team who also speaks that language regionally. Having said that, English is a universal language in India. Unlike what we see in China, English is the language of business, but it helps to have that regional know-how depending upon what the objectives of the U.S. companies and selling their products or services in that place.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. At Sannam S4, we have 5 offices across the country: Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, Chennai, and Pune. And I know from our operations with our international clients that some of those operations do not go out of the city boundaries, let alone the state boundaries. And when you're talking about certain states having 200 million people almost in population, you can certainly understand why. So I think that's very good advice. Diane, I'm going to hand over to you to just make some final comments before I then close the webinar.
Well, thank you, Adrian. And again, thank you to participants and especially to presenters. I think we've touched on a lot of really important aspects, and I do appreciate the individual who raised the FCPA issue because it is complicated. And that's why you do need the benefit of expert legal advice to ensure that there aren't mistakes made or misinterpretations of the law or closer connections than expected to agents on the ground here in India. And not unique, again, you know, people can tell the same stories about being in China and in other developing markets. So it's not that India is any better or worse, it's just it is something that you have to watch for. Agree completely, again, about the states. You know, one of the things we're talking about right now is excitement about the Prime Minister. As someone said recently when I was in Delhi, what a difference a change in attitude makes. And that's really true because things, frankly, are not all that different yet between now and last May when the elections were announced. But there is this strong feeling that change is in the air and the things can come. But as I also say to people, you know, the Prime Minister is like the captain of an aircraft carrier. You don't just decide to take a right turn and turn the wheel 90 degrees and you make the turn. This is going to be a long-term process that will require more patience than sometimes investors have or the press or the political class will have. And it will be imperative that this message come from the center and find its way to the state and local agencies. And that will take time too, because you're talking about, in some cases, a significant cultural shift that is going to happen over perhaps a generation, as opposed to, let's say, in the next 2 to 3 years. But that said, it's very evident that the Prime Minister is standing by example, and that the message is clearly coming out of his government that these are the expectations. And because of that, and because, frankly, they have an eye toward elections coming around again, national elections, we can talk about state elections and how that can also be beneficial to the National Democratic Alliance, but they are on a time frame, you know, so we should also be taking advantage of the sense of urgency that they feel about addressing this young population, creating jobs, providing for a vibrant consumer class. And again, those are all the reasons that we should feel very bullish, very upbeat about India, and keep trudging on that daily basis. As Bruce said, I think it was perfect. The road can be bumpy. You need patience, persistence, and diligence. But at the end of that road, there can be great success. So I thank you again. Thank the callers, the participants, and especially to you and to Ken, Adrian.
No, an absolute pleasure, Diane, and thanks for those words. I always like to remind people on these webinars and to remember that for Indian companies going into the US, they find it equally complicated. The differences in state rules, the differences in tax, navigating the market, and sometimes these webinars and open forums have a tendency to scare people into not coming. But you know, these are all typical business matters that you face anywhere in the world. And as Bruce said, if you're in the hands of good advisors from the beginning, they can help you navigate yourself through those challenges, just as your own advisors would in the US. So on that note, I'd like to thank Diane Farrell, Acting President of the US IBC. Diane, you're doing fantastic work, and you and your team are turning the relationship, 180 degrees. That aircraft carrier is to turn itself under your leadership. Well done. That's fantastic to see. Martine and Vinita, as always, some fantastically practical advice there, and you managed to succinctly give people some really, really useful points there, and I'm sure we'll be able to circulate some of those points to those who have listened. And Bruce, great to hear your story. It's tremendous to hear of such success and to know that it is possible. And I'm sure that many people will have taken comfort in the success that your business is having in India, and I wish you continued success there. To all of you that have joined, thank you very much. Thank you for bearing with us. Ken Silverman, who's our head of North America, who pulled this together. Thank you, Ken. I know you're there in the background listening. We will circulate some notes and an executive summary of the webinar. And should you have any questions, please feel free to send them to us, and we will ensure that each one of them are answered. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time, and please keep an eye out on the US IBC website. There are plenty of webinars and open forums for similar discussions, and we all wish you well in your journey in India, whichever stage you're at. Thank you very much. Good evening. Good morning.
And come meet Adrian at Vibrant Gujarat.
Come and meet me at Vibrant Gujarat. Absolutely.
Thank you.
All the best, everyone. Thank you very much, and good day.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Good day. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.